I have been monitoring their species for 3 standard cycles now, and I still can't wrap my cranial lobes around their complete disregard for basic survival instincts. My name is Korthvel, and I'm what you might call a xenobiologist, though that's a laughably inadequate translation. I study death worlds and the creatures stupid enough to thrive on them. Today, I'm watching a group of these hairless primates prepare to terraform Kepler 442b, a planet so hostile that even our military uses it for punishment details. The humans? They call it Tuesday. Control, this is Phoenix Base. We have got visual confirmation on the landing zone. Looks like a real garden party down there, crackled the voice of Captain Marcus Valdez through my monitoring equipment. His sarcasm was palpable even through the translation matrix. Down on the surface, Lieutenant Jessica Torres was already suiting up for the first atmospheric survey. She'd been briefed on the toxic methane storms, the crystalline predators that could slice through titanium, and the fact that the very air could dissolve her lungs in minutes. Her response? She whistled while checking her gear. "You know, Jess," called out Sergeant David Parr from across their makeshift habitat, "most people would be terrified right about now." "Most people don't get to plant flags on virgin worlds," she replied, her voice carrying that peculiar human mixture of bravado and genuine excitement. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? I nearly choked on my nutrient supplement. What's the worst that could happen? On a planet where the rain was literally acid and the local wildlife considered humans a delicacy?" These creatures were magnificent in their stupidity. From my concealed observation post in orbit, I watched them deploy their terraforming equipment with the casual efficiency of a species that had done this dozens of times before. The atmospheric processors hummed to life, beginning the decades-long process of converting poison into breathable air. The soil conditioners started their work, transforming toxic sludge into fertile ground. But here's where it gets interesting. While other species would have dropped their equipment and fled to a safe distance, the humans stayed. They didn't just stay, they made themselves at home. Within hours, they'd erected permanent structures, planted the first earth seeds in treated soil patches, and started a betting pool on which of them would be the first to get eaten by local fauna. Captain Valdez emerged from the command module, his weathered face scanning the alien horizon with the casual interest of someone checking the weather. Atmospheric readings are holding steady. Oxygen levels increasing by 0.02% every hour. "We are on schedule." "Sir," Torres called out, pointing to a cluster of movement in the distance. "We have got company." Through my enhanced sensors, I could see them too. The Skrull, indigenous predators the size of Earth elephants, but with the speed of cheetahs and teeth that could punch through starship hulls. A pack of 6, maybe 7, approaching the human settlement with obvious hostile intent. Most rational species would have retreated to their ships and bombarded the area from orbit. The humans? They grabbed their weapons and started making plans. "Park, get the barrier generators online. Torres, you are with me on the eastern flank. Chun, I want you providing overwatch from the habitat roof," Valdez ordered with the calm precision of someone discussing lunch arrangements. Technician Amy, Chun didn't question the order. She simply grabbed her rifle and climbed to her assigned position, humming what sounded like an ancient Earth War song. The others took their positions with similar nonchalance. The Skrull attacked with the coordinated ferocity that had made them apex predators for millions of years. They came in fast, low, using the toxic fog banks as cover. Their howls could shatter glass, their claws could rend metal, and their hide was tough enough to stop small arms fire. The humans opened fire with weapons that shouldn't have worked in the planet's electromagnetic field. They moved with a tactical awareness that suggested they'd fought creatures like this before, which, knowing humans, they probably had. "Left flank, 2 more coming in hot," Chin called out, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. Park's response was to adjust his weapon's frequency and put 3 rounds center mass into the nearest Skrull. The creature went down, but its pack mates didn't retreat. If anything, they seemed encouraged by the violence. "Well, that's not good," Torres muttered, reloading her weapon with practiced speed. "They're using pack tactics." "Since when do you speak, Skrull?" Valdez asked, dropping another attacker with a shot that should have been impossible given the wind conditions. "Since never," but I know crazy when I see it, she replied, diving for cover as razor-sharp claws whistled through the space her head had occupied seconds before. The battle lasted 14 minutes. When it was over, 6 Skrull lay dead around the human perimeter, and the 7th was limping away into the toxic mists. The humans had suffered exactly 0 casualties, though Park had a torn sleeve and Chun was complaining about a scuff on her helmet. Well, Valdez said, surveying the carnage with satisfaction, that was refreshing. Nothing like a good fight to get the blood pumping. Should we pursue the survivor? Torres asked, casually stepping over a Skrull corpse the size of a small vehicle. Nah, let's spread the word. Might save us some trouble later, the captain replied, then turned to his team. All right, people, back to work. These atmosphere processors won't monitor themselves. And just like that, they went back to terraforming. As if nearly being eaten alive was just another Tuesday morning inconvenience that I'd seen enough species attempt colonization to recognize patterns. Most began with extensive orbital surveys, careful planning, gradual deployment of automated systems, and minimal risk to personnel. The process typically took several years of preparation before the first colonists set foot on hostile soil. The humans had been on Kepler 442b for 6 hours. Control, this is Phoenix Base, Valdez reported to his orbiting support ship. Initial site survey complete. Hostiles neutralized. Beginning Phase 2 operations ahead of schedule. Ahead of schedule. On a planet that killed everything that looked at it wrong, they were ahead of schedule. Over the following weeks, I watched them work with efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. They adapted to the planet's quirks with disturbing ease. When the daily acid storms proved too frequent for normal construction, they simply built everything underground and called it vintage Earth subway architecture. When the local plant life turned out to be carnivorous and highly aggressive, Torres started harvesting it for biomass conversion. Free fertilizer, she called it, while wrestling with vines that could strangle a grown human in seconds. Park figured out how to jury-rig their atmosphere processors to work at double efficiency by using the planet's natural electrical storms as a power source. It's all about working with what you have got, he explained to a bewildered Chun, who was still trying to understand how her colleagues could be so casually brilliant. But it was their approach to the indigenous wildlife that truly amazed me. Instead of exterminating everything that moved, which would have been the logical approach, they started cataloging species. Not for scientific purposes, mind you. They were looking for allies. This one's interesting, Torres announced one morning, holding up a scanner reading from a creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a tank. Appears to be territorial, but not aggressive unless threatened. Might be useful for perimeter security. You want to domesticate the giant murder spiders. Chen asked, her voice climbing several octaves. I want to make friends with the giant murder spiders, Torres corrected. There's a difference. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. Within days, they'd established a working relationship with several species of local fauna. The tank spiders, as they dubbed them, proved excellent at keeping other predators away from the human settlement. In exchange, the humans provided them with processed biomass and protection from their natural enemies. Sir, Park called out one afternoon, we got a problem. Valdez looked up from his daily equipment check. What kind of problem? The good kind. Atmospheric conversion is proceeding faster than projected. At this rate, we will have breathable air in 18 months instead of the estimated 3 years. That's a problem how? Well, sir, the colonist ships aren't scheduled to arrive for another 2 years. We are going to be sitting on a habitable world with nothing to do. Valdez grinned, the expression of a man who'd found his element in chaos. I can think of worse problems to have. Let's see how much faster we can make it go. They could make it go much faster, it turned out. By month 3, they'd established a thriving ecosystem around their base. Earth plants grew alongside carefully selected native species. Their atmosphere processors worked in harmony with indigenous weather patterns. The planet that had been designated as marginally habitable with extensive terraforming was rapidly becoming a garden world. But here's what truly impressed me. They weren't just changing the planet. The planet was changing them too. Chun, the technician who'd started the mission as a quiet, by-the-book engineer, was now leading expeditions into the deepest, most dangerous parts of the continental shelf. She developed an almost supernatural ability to predict weather patterns and communicate with local wildlife. Park had become something of a savant at jury-rigging alien technology. He could make their Earth equipment work in ways that defied several laws of physics, often using nothing more than salvage materials and what he called creative engineering. Torres had appointed herself as the settlement's unofficial diplomat, establishing trade relationships with several species of indigenous creatures. She spoke fluent tank spider now, though she insisted it was mostly body language and mutual respect. And Valdez? He'd become the kind of leader that other species would follow into certain death, simply because he made the impossible seem routine. But they weren't alone on this world, and that's where things got complicated. "Sir, we are picking up movement in the northern quadrant," Chin reported from her monitoring station. "Multiple contacts, definitely artificial. Indigenous?" Valdez asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Negative. These are off-world signatures. Someone else is operating on our rock. Through my long-range sensors, I could see them too. A Confederation scouting party, probably advanced scouts for a mining operation. They'd landed 3 days ago in a region the humans hadn't yet explored, and they were setting up extraction equipment with typical Confederate efficiency. The Confederation didn't terraform worlds. They strip-mined them." "Well," Valdez said after reviewing the sensor data, "this is about to get interesting." He was right, of course. Humans had a talent for understatement that I found both admirable and terrifying. Interesting was how they described situations that would send most species fleeing to the next star system. The Confederate scouts had made a critical miscalculation. They'd assumed, reasonably, that any species attempting to colonize Kepler 442b would be struggling for basic survival. They hadn't accounted for humans turning the planet into their personal playground in less than 4 months. "Torres, Park, suit up. We're going to pay our neighbors a visit," Valdez ordered. "Chun, you're holding down the fort. If we are not back in 6 hours, send word to Control that we have made new friends." Should I specify whether they are the good kind of friends or the kind that eat people? Chun asked. "Use your best judgment." As I watched the 3 humans load their equipment and head north toward the Confederate position, I found myself genuinely curious about the outcome. In my observations, humans had a remarkable talent for turning potential disasters into unexpected opportunities. The Confederates were about to discover why humans were considered the galaxy's most successful colonizing species. They were also about to learn why picking a fight with humans on their adopted homeworld was generally considered a career-ending mistake. The next 6 hours were going to be very interesting indeed. What happened next will forever change how I view tactical planning. Across species, you see, most civilized beings approach conflict with predictable patterns: reconnaissance, assessment, negotiation, and if necessary, escalation. The humans approached the Confederate mining operation like they approached everything else on this planet, with complete disregard for conventional wisdom. "Torres, what's your read on their perimeter?" Valdez whispered into his comm as they crouched behind a ridge overlooking the Confederate camp. 12 sentries, automated defense grid, standard extraction protocol, she replied, scanning the area with equipment that somehow worked better in the planet's hostile environment than it did on Earth. They're dug in deep, but they are also completely focused on keeping the local nasties out. "They don't know we are here," Park added, his voice carrying a note of anticipation that I'd learned to associate with impending chaos. "Want to keep it that way? For now," Valdez decided. "Let's see what they are really after." What the Confederates were after, as it turned out, was far more disturbing than simple resource extraction. Through their intercepted communications, I learned they were harvesting something called neural crystalline matrices from a planet's core. These formations, unique to death worlds, could be processed into the most powerful computational substrates in known space. Mining them required completely destabilizing the planet's geological structure. "They're going to crack the whole world open," Torres said after decoding their operational parameters. "Everything we have built here, everything we have made friends with, all the progress we have made, gone." "Over my dead body," Valdez replied, which in human parlance meant he was prepared to fight. But here's where humans truly shine. Instead of attacking the Confederate position directly, they began what I can only describe as psychological warfare through environmental manipulation. Remember those tank spiders Torres had befriended? Turns out they had cousins. Lots of cousins. And they were perfectly happy to relocate their nest closer to the Confederate mining operation in exchange for some of that processed biomass the humans had been stockpiling. Sir, we are seeing increased seismic activity around the mining site, reported Confederate sensor operator Zonkill to his commanding officer. Could be natural geological instability. Maintain operations, ordered Confederate strike leader Vostam, a veteran of 17 successful resource extractions. This world's geological activity is within acceptable parameters. What Vostam didn't know was that those acceptable parameters had been carefully orchestrated by Park, who'd spent weeks mapping the planet's natural fault lines and learning how to trigger controlled seismic events. The increased activity wasn't random. It was a countdown. Meanwhile, Chen had been busy with her own project. Remember those carnivorous plants Torres had been harvesting? Chen had discovered they responded to certain electromagnetic frequencies by releasing airborne spores that caused severe disorientation in most carbon-based life forms. The spores were harmless to humans, thanks to some quirk of their unique physiology. Atmospheric contamination levels are rising, reported Confederate technician Drellnex, his voice betraying the first hints of concern. Recommend immediate filtration upgrades. Negative, Vostem replied. We are 3 days from completion. Maintain schedule. The beauty of the human approach was its subtlety. They didn't attack the Confederates directly, which would have triggered defensive protocols and brought in reinforcements. Instead, they made the planet itself hostile to the invaders while remaining perfectly comfortable themselves. WY Day 4. The Confederate operation was struggling with equipment failures, personnel disorientation, and what their reports described as increasingly aggressive local fauna. Strike leader, we are losing efficiency at an exponential rate, Zonkill reported, his voice strained. Equipment failures have increased by 300%. Half our extraction crew is reporting severe headaches and vision problems. And the local creatures? Vostam asked, reviewing casualty reports that showed 17 injuries in the past 24 hours. They seem to be coordinating. It's like they're working together. They were working together, of course. Torres had spent weeks establishing communication protocols with multiple species. She'd essentially turned the entire ecosystem into an early warning network, with herself as the central coordinator. Time to introduce ourselves. Valdez decided on day 5, when the Confederate operation was operating at less than 30% efficiency. They approached the Confederate camp openly, walking through the perimeter defenses like they owned the place, which in a very real sense they did. Greetings. Valdez called out cheerfully to the first Confederate sentry they encountered. Beautiful day for mining, isn't it? The sentry, a professional soldier who'd served in 3 different war zones, was so startled by the casual appearance of humans on a supposedly uninhabited death world that he forgot to raise his weapon. Who? How did you get past our perimeter? He stammered. Perimeter? Torres looked around with genuine confusion. Oh, you mean those sensor grids? We have been walking through those for days. They are not calibrated for this planet's interference patterns. Which was true, but only because Park had spent considerable time ensuring the interference patterns worked to their advantage. Strike leader Vostam emerged from his command module, weapon drawn, flanked by 6 heavily armed soldiers. You will identify yourselves and explain your presence on this world. Captain Marcus Valdez, Earth Colonial Authority, Valdez replied with military precision. Then his tone turned conversational. We are the advanced terraforming team. Been here about 4 months now. Nice place, once you get used to it. Impossible, voice things snarled. This world is classified as uninhabitable. No species has successfully established permanent presence here. Well, that's awkward, Park said with a grin. Should we tell our tank spider friends they don't exist? They will be crushed. As if summoned by his words, 3 of the massive creatures emerged from concealment around the Confederate camp. They moved with purpose, positioning themselves strategically around the group of soldiers. "Those are Kepler predators," Zonkil whispered, his voice tight with fear. "They hunt in coordinated packs. Luna here is actually pretty friendly once you get to know her," Torres said, approaching the nearest tank spider and running her hand along its armored carapace. "She's been helping us keep the really dangerous stuff away from both our settlements." The Confederate soldiers watched in stunned silence as Torres communicated with a creature that could have torn their camp apart single-handedly. "What do you want?" Vostem demanded, though his commanding tone had lost much of its authority. "To talk," Valdez replied. "Your mining operation is going to destabilize this planet's core. That's a problem for us, since we live here now. The Confederation has legal claim to this world's resources under the Galactic Extraction Protocols. The Galactic Extraction Protocols don't apply to inhabited worlds," Torres pointed out helpfully. "Check Section 12, subsection 47. This world isn't inhabited." Strike Leader Chen's voice crackled through their comm system, somehow having tapped into Confederate communications. "You might want to look at your atmospheric readings." The readings showed what the Confederates had been too focused on their extraction to notice. The planet's atmosphere had shifted dramatically over the past 4 months. Oxygen levels had increased by 40%. Toxic compounds had decreased by 60%. The electromagnetic interference that had been disrupting their equipment was actually a byproduct of massive ecological rehabilitation. "You have been terraforming a death world," Vostem said slowly, the implications dawning on him. "We have been gardening," Valdez corrected. "There's a difference." What followed was the most unusual diplomatic negotiation I have ever witnessed. The humans didn't threaten the Confederates with violence. They didn't demand they leave immediately. Instead, they offered them a choice. "Here's the deal," Valdez said, settling onto a convenient rock as if he were discussing weather patterns. "You can continue your mining operation and watch this planet tear itself apart around you. Your equipment will keep failing. The local wildlife will keep getting more aggressive, and eventually you will have to abandon the operation anyway. Or," Vostem asked suspiciously, "or you can work with us. Help us finish the terraforming process. In exchange, we will give you exclusive extraction rights to 3 uninhabited systems we have surveyed but haven't claimed yet. Rich in the same crystalline matrices you are after here, but without the geological instability." It was a brilliant solution and typically human in its audacity. They were offering to trade something they didn't technically own, yet for something they absolutely couldn't afford to lose. "Why would you do this?" Vostem asked. "Because we are not just colonizing this world," Torres said, gesturing to the transformed landscape around them. "We are adopting it. And you don't strip mine your home." The Confederate strike leader spent several hours consulting with his superiors via subspace communication. The humans waited patiently, sharing their processed rations and telling stories about their various encounters with local wildlife. HFY Sunset. They had an agreement. "The Confederation accepts your proposal," Vostem announced. "We will assist with your terraforming operation in exchange for the coordinates to those 3 systems." "Excellent," Valdez said, standing and extending his hand. "Welcome to Kepler 442b. We call it New Eden." What happened over the next 6 months challenged everything I thought I knew about interspecies cooperation. The Confederate mining equipment, designed for resource extraction, was retooled for massive environmental engineering projects. Their personnel, trained for industrial operations, became expert in ecological management. The tank spiders learned to work alongside Confederate heavy machinery. The carnivorous plants were cultivated into natural air filtration systems. The acid storms were harnessed to power expanded atmosphere processors. Within a year, New Eden had become the most successful terraforming project in recorded galactic history. More importantly, it had become something unprecedented, a truly collaborative world where multiple species work together not out of necessity, but out of mutual respect. Vostem, who had arrived as a conqueror, became the planet's first non-human permanent resident. "These humans," he told me during one of our recorded interviews, "they don't just adapt to worlds. They make worlds adapt to them. And somehow, they make it work for everyone." The three systems the humans had promised proved to be even richer in resources than New Eden's core. The Confederation established profitable mining operations there within 2 years, and the relationship between the Confederate industrial complex and the Earth Colonial Authority became a model for interspecies cooperation. But that's not the end of the story. 5 years after first contact, New Eden had become a hub of interspecies trade and cooperation. Representatives from dozens of civilizations came to study the terraforming techniques developed there. The world that had been considered a death trap had become a shining example of what could be accomplished when different species work together. Chun, now director of ecological engineering, had perfected techniques for rapid ecosystem development that were being used on dozens of other worlds. Park had founded the Interspecies Technical Exchange, teaching other civilizations how to adapt their technology to work in harmony with local environments. Torres had become New Eden's first elected governor, with overwhelming support from both human and non-human residents. Her approach to interspecies diplomacy, based on mutual respect and shared goals rather than dominance hierarchies, had become the standard for colonial administration. In Valdez, he'd been promoted to colonial admiral and was leading terraforming operations across the galaxy, always with mixed species crews, always with the same philosophy. Work with what you have, make friends with the locals, and turn problems into opportunities. But here's what impressed me most about the humans. They never forgot where they came from. Every year on the anniversary of their first landing, they held a celebration that honored both their achievements and the world that had taught them so much. They called it Gardener's Day, and it became a galactic holiday celebrated on dozens of worlds. During one of these celebrations, I asked Valdez what he thought was the secret to human success in seemingly impossible situations. "We are too stupid to know when we are beaten," he replied with that characteristic grin, "and too stubborn to quit when we should." He paused, looking out over the thriving ecosystem that had once been a toxic wasteland. But mostly, I think we just remember that every world, no matter how hostile, has something beautiful about it. You just have to be willing to look for it. As I compile this report for the Galactic Xenobiological Institute, I find myself struggling to categorize humanity within our standard species classifications. They are not the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. They are not the most numerous or the longest lived. But they possess something that I have never observed in any other species: the ability to find hope in hopeless situations and to make that hope contagious. They don't just survive on death worlds. They make those worlds want to live. In my professional opinion, humanity's greatest strength isn't their adaptability, their technology, or their tactical brilliance. It's their unshakable belief that any problem can be solved if you're willing to work hard enough and crazy enough to try. They are gardeners in the truest sense of the word. They don't just plant seeds in soil. They plant possibilities in the impossible. And that, more than anything else, is why humans are special. But my story doesn't end there, because humans have this annoying habit of exceeding even the most generous expectations. 3 years after the New Eden Accords, as the agreement came to be known throughout the galaxy, I received an urgent communication from the Galactic Council. A crisis had developed in the Outer Rim territories. The hegemony, a militaristic empire that had been expanding aggressively for decades, had encountered something that stopped their advance cold. The single human colony ship had landed on Zirian Prime, a world the hegemony had marked for conquest. The planet was strategically vital, sitting at the intersection of 3 major trade routes. It was also completely uninhabitable by any known standard. Surface temperatures that could melt steel, atmospheric pressure that would crush most life forms, and radiation levels that made it a natural quarantine zone. The hegemony had expected to find the human colonists dead within days. Instead, they found them thriving. "Impossible," declared hegemony War Prime Thax Scorval, reviewing the reconnaissance reports from his flagship. "No carbon-based life form can survive on that world's surface. The humans appear to be living underground," War Prime reported his intelligence officer. "But our thermal scans show extensive surface activity as well. Send a diplomatic envoy," Thax Scorval ordered. "I want to know what they're doing down there." The envoy, who returned 3 days later, was changed. Not physically, but something in his demeanor had shifted fundamentally. War Prime, they invited me to dinner, the envoy reported, his voice carrying a note of bewilderment. They're growing food on a world where the very air is poison. They have tamed creatures that our military classifies as apex predators. And they're doing it all while genuinely happy. Explain. They have turned the entire planet into a geothermal power grid. The crushing atmospheric pressure runs their industrial processes. The radiation that should kill them is somehow being converted into usable energy. They are not just surviving War Prime. They are building something extraordinary. The humans on Zirian Prime were led by a woman named Captain Rebecca Stone, a veteran of the Martian colonies who had volunteered for what was essentially a suicide mission. Her approach to the impossible world was quintessentially human. "You know what this place reminds me of?" she said to her second-in-command, Engineer Luis Rodriguez, as they watched the sunrise through their reinforced observation dome. The sunrise was actually a controlled nuclear fusion event in the planet's atmosphere, but they'd learned to appreciate its terrible beauty. "What's that, Captain?" "My grandmother's garden back on Earth. She lived in the desert, and everyone said nothing would grow there. But she saw potential where others saw problems." Rodriguez, who had been on New Eden during the early terraforming days, understood immediately. "So we're gardening again." "We're always gardening, Luis. It's what we do." What the humans were doing on Zirian Prime defied every conventional understanding of planetary colonization. They weren't trying to change the world to suit them. Instead, they were changing themselves to work with the world's existing systems. Their habitats were integrated into the planet's natural altitude networks, using geothermal energy for power and protection from surface radiation. They developed new agricultural techniques that used the planet's extreme conditions as advantages rather than obstacles. But most remarkably, they'd established a symbiotic relationship with the Zirian heat drakes, massive creatures that lived in the planet's molten core regions. These beings, which the hegemony had classified as mindless monsters, turned out to be highly intelligent and deeply curious about the strange newcomers who could survive in their realm. Captain Stone called out biologist Dr. Sarah Kim from her lab deep in the colony's lower levels. "You need to see this." Stone made her way through corridors that hummed with carefully channeled geothermal energy. The colony had grown from a desperate survival shelter into a thriving underground city in just 3 years. "What have you got, Sarah?" "I have been working with Flamesinger. That's the heat drake we have been communicating with, and I think we have made a breakthrough." Kim led Stone to a chamber where the temperature hovered around 800 degrees Celsius, comfortable for heat drakes, but requiring the humans to wear specialized suits. In the center of the room, a massive creature that looked like a cross between a dragon and a living furnace was manipulating what appeared to be molten metal with incredible precision. "Flamesinger has been teaching me their metallurgy techniques," Kim explained. "Captain, they don't just work with metal, they think with it. Their entire civilization is based on metallic consciousness, meaning they have been trying to communicate with our equipment all along. Our computers, our power systems, everything we have built, it's all been talking to them. They have been helping us without us realizing it." This revelation changed everything. The humans on Zirian Prime weren't just surviving through their own ingenuity. They were part of a partnership with a species that existed in a state of matter most civilizations couldn't even imagine. When Hegemony War Prime Thax Scorval learned of this development, his response was predictably military. "Prepare the invasion fleet," he ordered. "Whatever the humans have accomplished, we will take it from them." War Prime, his strategic advisor, ventured carefully. "Perhaps we should consider negotiation. The humans have established relationships with indigenous species before. They might be willing to share their techniques." "The hegemony does not negotiate with inferior species," Thax Scorval declared. "We conquer." The hegemony invasion fleet that arrived at Zirian Prime was massive by any standard. 200 ships carrying 50,000 of the galaxy's most experienced warriors. They expected to find a small, desperate human colony clinging to survival on a hostile world. Instead, they found something that redefined their understanding of military strategy. War Prime reported Fleet Scanner Vex Mullen. I'm reading massive energy signatures across the planet's surface. The humans appear to have weaponized the entire world. It was true. Working with the heat drakes, the humans had turned Xerion Prime's natural systems into a planetary defense network. The same geothermal energy that powered their colony could be redirected into focused beam weapons. The atmospheric pressure that made the world hostile to most life forms could be weaponized into crushing force fields. But the most impressive defense was the simplest, the heat drakes themselves. Hegemony Fleet, this is Captain Stone of the Xerion Prime colony, came the transmission from the planet's surface. You are entering sovereign territory. Please state your intentions. Human colony, you will surrender immediately or face destruction. Thax Scorval responded with typical hegemony diplomacy. That's going to be a problem, War Prime, Stone replied, her voice carrying that characteristic human mixture of politeness and absolute steel. You see, this isn't just our territory anymore. You're also trespassing in heat drake space, and they take trespassing very seriously. What emerged from Xerion Prime's molten surface defied the hegemony's understanding of physics. Hundreds of heat drakes, each the size of a hegemony cruiser, rose through the planet's atmosphere as if it were water. They moved in perfect formation, their metallic consciousness allowing them to communicate and coordinate at the speed of thought. Impossible, Thax Scorval breathed. Those creatures cannot survive in space. Actually, they can't survive anywhere else, Stone corrected helpfully. They don't breathe oxygen like we do. They metabolize cosmic radiation and stellar winds. Space is just another environment to them. The heat drakes didn't attack the hegemony fleet. They simply surrounded it, their massive forms glowing with internal fires that registered as weapons charges on every scanner. War Prime, Vexmolin reported with poorly concealed panic. Each of those creatures is generating energy output equivalent to our main battle cannons. We are outnumbered and outgunned. By animals? Thax Scorval snarled. By friends, Stone corrected again. War Prime, I'm going to give you the same choice we gave the Confederates at New Eden. You can try to take what you want by force and watch it slip through your fingers, or you can work with us and discover opportunities you never imagined. The hegemony does not negotiate. The hegemony is about to get schooled, muttered Engineer Rodriguez from his position at the colony's tactical station. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. The heat drakes didn't destroy the hegemony fleet. They simply disabled it. With surgical precision, they neutralized weapons systems, communication arrays, and propulsion drives. Within an hour, 200 of the galaxy's most advanced warships were floating helplessly in space. But here's where the story takes another uniquely human turn. Instead of leaving the hegemony forces stranded, Stone ordered rescue operations. Captain, are you insane? Dr. Kim asked as human rescue shuttles launched toward the disabled hegemony vessels. They came here to conquer us. They came here because they don't understand what we are building, Stone replied. Let's show them. Over the next several days, hegemony personnel were brought to the surface of Xerion Prime in small groups. They were given protective suits, guided tours of the colony, and opportunities to interact with both humans and heat drakes. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Soldiers who had arrived expecting conquest found themselves fascinated by techniques that turned impossible conditions into advantages. Engineers who had been trained to see every world as a resource to be exploited discovered the concept of partnership with planetary systems that War Prime, Thax Scorval himself, was among the last to be brought to the surface. He descended through Xerion Prime's hellish atmosphere, expecting to find a primitive settlement struggling against nature. Instead, he found a city that existed in harmony with forces that could power entire star systems. He met creatures that thought in ways his species had never imagined. He witnessed technologies that didn't just work despite impossible conditions. They worked because of them. This is not conquest, he said to Stone as they stood in a chamber where heat drakes and humans worked together to forge materials that shouldn't exist. No, it's partnership, Stone agreed. It's what happens when you stop trying to dominate your environment and start trying to understand it. My people will not understand. Your people will learn, just like you're learning. Just like we learned. The Hegemony War Prime spent a week on Xerion Prime. When he returned to his fleet, he carried with him plans for technologies that could revolutionize hegemony industry, agricultural techniques that could make desert worlds bloom, and most importantly, a new philosophy of expansion. The hegemony will not be conquering Xerion Prime, he announced to his assembled fleet commanders. We will be establishing a permanent embassy here. We have much to learn from these humans and their partners. 6 months later, the Hegemony Expansion Protocol was officially revised. Instead of conquest and subjugation, the new approach emphasized cooperation and mutual benefit. The change was controversial within hegemony space, but the results spoke for themselves. Worlds that had resisted hegemony expansion for decades suddenly welcomed them, partners. Resources that had been inaccessible through force became available through cooperation. The hegemony grew stronger and more prosperous than ever before. And it all started with humans who were too stubborn to accept that a world was impossible to live on. As I compile the final sections of my report. Now 5 years after the Xerion Prime incident, I find myself returning to the question that has driven my research. What makes humans so uniquely successful at turning impossible situations into opportunities? I have observed dozens of species, studied hundreds of colonization attempts, analyzed countless examples of interspecies contact. But humans remain unique in their approach to the impossible. They don't just adapt to hostile environments. They make hostile environments want to be hospitable. They don't just survive impossible odds. They make the impossible seem routine. They don't just solve problems. They turn problems into opportunities for growth. But perhaps most remarkably, they make their success contagious. Every species that works closely with humans seems to absorb some of their optimism, their creativity, their absolute refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy is changing because of humans, not through conquest or dominance, but through something far more powerful. The simple belief that any challenge can be overcome if you're willing to work hard enough and think creatively enough. They are gardeners of the impossible, and they're teaching the rest of us how to grow.